When I first moved to Australia, I assumed renting would be a smooth and easy process. I thought, I've got good references, I've previously rented in the UK, I've paid my rent on time, what more could I need? But within the first month of me actively looking for apartments here, it hit me like a big bag of flour in the face, just how difficult it was going to be. So in this video today, not only am I going to help you avoid all of the mistakes that I made, but I'm going to explain the market you're riding into, the maze of interstate law, and the system that you've never heard of. So without further ado, Act 1, the market you're riding into. I'm on a bike now. Let's go. So number one, the vacancy rate is tighter than ever. So vacancy rate is literally just the percentage of properties in that town or city that don't have anybody living in them. You look at Australia on a map and the continent is massive. So you think, oh, surely there's plenty of room. But currently the vacancy rates in Australia are at a historic low. I mean, look at this data from propertyupdate.com.au. Sydney has a vacancy rate of 1.5%, Melbourne 1.7%, and then we've got Brisbane at 0.9%, which is my favourite city and where I live. Perth is at 0.7%, and as you go down the list, it's vacant. One thing I would say though is, although Brisbane has one of the lowest vacancy rates, I have never found it a problem when applying for a rental property. The fact that I'm a foreigner on a visa, people seem pretty good here, the landlords and the real estate agents, and as far as I'm aware, it's never been factored into me not being accepted for a rental property. But you know what does have a very high vacancy rate right now? That's hitting that like button. If you feel like it really does help me out, cheers. But tight vacancy rates don't just mean fewer listings, it means that the whole viewing process is something that nobody can prepare you for. Okay, number two, group viewings. So imagine this, as an actor, you have to go to auditions and in that room will be 20 other people, maybe 10, maybe 5, looking exactly like you. And you know, even though they teach you this at drama school, no, don't think of them as your competition. You know, you're all just collaborators. You know deep down inside, they're your competition, right? What I didn't expect is it to be the exact same thing when you're just trying to find a home to rent in Australia. And this really surprised me because in the UK, you almost always have your own private viewing with the letting agent. They're often very late in the UK, but they'll meet you there if they do show up and they give you a proper tour of the apartment. It's also their way to kind of check that you're someone reliable. But in Australia, you rock up to these group viewings, which is pretty much every viewing. There'll be 10 other people either already in the property or waiting outside in a queue. The real estate agent will take your name and then imagine you doing that, but then 6 more times that day. And then the next day, and then the next day. And it's just very stressful. Kind of never ends. Look, I know I sound like I'm complaining right now, but I adore Australia, and I think Australia actually beats the UK at so many things. But when it comes to finding your home before you've been approved, it does feel unnecessarily difficult. Of course, with the vacancy rates being so tight, how can I blame real estate agents for wanting to bulk these viewings together? However, as a tenant or soon to be tenant, it's very demoralizing. So anyway, you get through the viewing, maybe you get approved for the place, but then the next thing is your bond. Probably doesn't go where you expect it to. Act 2, the maze nobody explains. So number 3, your bond goes to a government authority, not your landlord. Now this is the twist that most new arrivals don't see coming. In the UK, we call our bond a deposit. Your landlord does legally have to put it in a government-backed deposit scheme, very similar to Australia. However, what's different with Australia is that every single state has their own bond scheme backed by the government. So for example, QLD is the Residential Tenancies Authority, or RTA. Tasmania is Rental Deposit Authority, RDA. WA is Bonds Online on the Consumer Protection website. Now, as far as I'm aware, landlords and agents are legally required to lodge your bond with the state authority because that's your right, that's your protection. But do a little bit of research, make sure you know the name of your state government authority and where your bond is actually going. And that state-by-state pattern doesn't just stop when you lodge your bond, it continues into pretty much every line of your lease. Because number 4, it's state law, not national law. So this is the blind spot that trips most foreigners up, myself included, assuming that Australian rental law is the exact same for the entire country. So every single state has its own tenancy act. So something true in Brisbane might not be the same as Sydney, something true in Melbourne might not be the same as Adelaide. I could go on. And this is really important that you do your research on it because it might affect you at some point. Things like whether you can have a pet or not, notice periods for when your landlord can legally enter your property for something like an inspection. And honestly, if I went through every single state and every single difference, I would absolutely bore you to death, so I'm not going to do that on this video. But here's the major trap. Sarah from Canada, who wants to move to the snowy fields of Tasmania, will Google how to move to Australia, get an article written by a Brizzy real estate agent and go, great, I know exactly what I'm doing. But all they've done is taught themselves about the Brisbane rental market and community, and they come away knowing very little about Tasmania. And sadly, just because it's true in one state doesn't mean it's true in another. By the way, if you enjoy these culture comparison videos, sign up to my free weekly newsletter. It's only a 3-minute read. You get more of this stuff, plus the behind the scenes of what it's like to rebuild your life in Australia. So you can scan the QR code here, or it's in a link in the description below. But once you know the rules for your state, your next job is to actually find somewhere that suits your way of life. Act 3. The system you've never heard of. Right, number 5, furnished properties are less common. Okay, so one of my first ever professional acting jobs took me to Osaka, Japan, and they gave each of us actors our own studio apartment, which was furnished. Lovely. But I thought, oh, I'm here for 13 months. Why don't I add a few extra pieces of furniture for, you know, that comfort? And then at the end of the contract, I had to get rid of it. And I was trying to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. I was trying to give it away, and it was just a massive pain in the bottom. But then I moved to Australia, and it turns out that landlords prefer to rent their properties unfurnished, and that seems to be the norm here. Whereas in the UK, so many places are furnished, and the annoying thing is about it, they're furnished with the cheapest flat pack IKEA furniture. It's already half broken, and they say to you, yeah, that'll do. And yes, that includes the mattress. And if you're British watching this, you're probably thinking, oh, that's annoying. I want it furnished, but it kind of works out better for you and for the landlord. So for the landlord, they prefer it because there's less inventory to keep track of. But it's great for you because it means you can actually get a way better bookshelf, a way better bed frame, a way better chair or sofa for free potentially off of Facebook Marketplace, and it is way better than any UK rental property that came furnished, any of the stuff in there. So if you're coming here on a short-term visa, a working holiday visa, you're only here for a year or two, it's well worth factoring into whether you want a furnished place or unfurnished, and it often should depend on how long you're staying here if you don't want the headache of having to get rid of all your furniture when you go back to your home country. The next thing is actually getting approved for it. And there was a lot more paperwork than I expected because number 6, longer application forms, but they are easier to complete. Imagine this, when I was renting in Ealing in London, one of the most technologically advanced cities, and when our letting agent sent us this mega PDF that we might have had to print out and sign and then scan and everything like that, I was shocked. Whereas Australian applications, I found them to be much longer, but they're generally digital and done through rental application portal, something like to apply. Now treat the length of the application as an opportunity, not a hurdle. We already know that in Sydney, the vacancy rate is 1.5%. 1.5%. So can you imagine the 50 other people sending in and handing in an application for that flat? This is especially important if you are self-employed like me. You need to prove to them that you are reliable, that you will pay your rent on time, and that you make enough money to be able to pay your rent. So they're going to want to see your financial reports, bank statements. Give them as much information that you feel comfortable with as possible. I didn't think this was true at first, and I half-asked a couple of rental applications and somebody else beat me to it. The application for this place I spent 2 hours on, and I made sure that they had all of the PDFs, all of the documents, in all of the additional information boxes where you were free to type anything you want or not. It was optional. I would put lots of extra detail about my professional situation, my financial situation, and we ended up getting approved. And I'm a self-employed actor, so if I can do it, you can too. Now, once you've got your application sorted, there's one more system that you need to know about before you rent in Australia, and that's number 7. There's a tenancy deny list database. So in the UK, how does a landlord actually know that you're not only reliable to pay the rent, but you are who you say you are and you're not going to burn the house down? In the UK, they pretty much rely on things like referrals, ID checks, credit checks, whereas in Australia they have the TICA, which is Australia's largest tenancy database. Now, this actually is as scary as it sounds, and I'm not trying to fearmonger at all whatsoever. Look, if you are a reliable tenant, you do the bare minimum, you pay your rent on time, you're cooperative with your property manager and your landlord, you are fair and reasonable, and you keep the property in good nick, then there's no reason you'll have any problems. But if you're a really bad tenant, you can actually be added to the ban list on this database, which makes it incredibly difficult to rent a future home in Australia. One person on Reddit actually said it's a fast track to homelessness. Now, the UK did try to set up a few of these companies that do a similar thing, but they never really took off and they're not in the mainstream. But Australia was like, no, we're going to have a more centralized database where if you mess up badly, your future landlords are going to know about it, and yeah, it's a little bit scary. But before you can even think about renting a property in Australia, you need to be able to afford it, and let me tell you, it's not cheap. So go watch this video here where I break down every single teeny tiny cost. I'm sure it will help you. See you in the next one.